Greetings, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear participants, and colleagues. Welcome to the United Nations 15th Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities side event, including perspectives of mental well-being and psychosocial disabilities in disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. This event is co-organized by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, UN Women, the University of Tokyo KOMEX, Porque, Empower Project, UNITE, and STEP in close collaboration with various civil society organizations, including organizations of persons with disabilities. I am Takashi Izutsu from the University of Tokyo. It is my great honor to serve as moderator today. We, the UNITAR, University of Tokyo Global Forum on Diversity, Disability and Inclusion, UN Women, and STEP, together with the United Nations Secretariat and various organizations of persons with disabilities, have organized a series of events to protect the rights of persons with disabilities and to promote diversity and inclusion in peace and security, sustainable development, and humanitarian action since 2020. I would like to thank our partners for all the constructive and transformative collaboration. I would like to especially thank His Excellency Ambassador Gallegos, former Foreign Minister of Ecuador, former Chair of the Committee of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Mr. Nikhil Seth, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR, for their leadership and strong commitment. We are experiencing increasing number of natural disasters with severe impacts worldwide. In addition, we are facing a lot of wars and armed conflicts on this globe, despite the fact that the international community pledged to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in a lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind 77 years ago in the United Nations Charter. The Charter continues with saying, "We, the people of the United Nations, determined to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of all people to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom." Persons with disabilities are often one of the most marginalized or excluded people in policy and programs related to disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. As a result, their well-being, rights, and even their lives are jeopardized. For example, at the time of the East Japan Great Earthquake in Japan in 2011, the mortality of persons with disabilities was 2 to 4 times higher than that of others. In particular, persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities are too often misunderstood, forgotten, ostracized, or excluded in the disaster risk reduction measures and humanitarian action. We have global normative frameworks that explicitly point out and prioritize importance of inclusive disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action, including the Convention, 2030 Agenda and its SDGs, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and others. In addition, in 2019, the Security Council adopted its groundbreaking resolution 2475, which calls upon member states and parties to armed conflict to protect persons with disabilities, including persons with psychosocial disabilities in conflict situations, and to ensure they have access to justice, basic services, and unimpeded humanitarian assistance. Further, various United Nations agencies and international NGOs got together and came up with the IASC guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action in the same year. So now we have all the global tools that would help us in moving forward to the concrete action and the realization on the ground in each and every country. So the objectives of today's event are to look into the state-of-the-art global normative frameworks on inclusion of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action, and to share good practices of organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities and other key stakeholders, including young people from Asia and the Pacific region, which is known as one of the most disaster-prone regions, and to discuss the way forward to further strengthen the inclusion of and meaningful participation of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and also to mainstream a perspective of mental well-being for all in disaster risk reduction, as well as humanitarian action. Now, it is my great honor to welcome Dr. Abul Hasnat Monjurul Kabir, Global Advisor and Team Leader, Gender Equality and Disability Inclusion, UN Women.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to represent UN Women and speak today at the United Nations 15th Conference of State Parties to the CRPD side event on including perspective of mental well-being and psychosocial disabilities in disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. This is an important topic. More importantly, within the disaster reduction and humanitarian action, the lack of awareness on disability inclusion make it even more compelling. As we are aware, people and communities are impacted differently according to their power and status in society, and women and girls often have increased vulnerability due to social norms, family duties, and limited access to power and resources. Factors such as age, disability, ethnicity, social class, etc. will multiply these vulnerabilities. People with disabilities, including persons with mental health condition and psychosocial disabilities, face specific challenges during disaster and rehabilitation phase. Now, from a normative perspective, we have progressed quite a bit. The Convention on the Rights of the Person with Disabilities includes person with mental health condition and psychosocial disabilities, and its Article 11 states that state parties will take all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of all persons with disabilities in situation of risk, including situation of armed conflict, humanitarian emergencies, and the occurrence of natural disaster. Now, we have also seen that subsequent references to it in the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2015, in addition to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which adapted in the conference I just mentioned to, and the Charter on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action, which was also endorsed at the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, put inclusive disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action for all persons with disabilities as core principles. So these are certainly progress. But at the practical level, at the implementation level, some of this progress at the global level or in the standard setting normative level hasn't achieved in the same way we expect them to guide local action. And there lies the challenges. The knowledge and experience gained by women and people with disabilities in most cases remain untapped source of knowledge in the DRR and its management. So it is important that we capture those knowledge, the aspects of untapped potential in disaster risk reduction. Now, UN Women is committed to broaden this knowledge base and gradually expand the accessibility, particularly for women and girls with disabilities as part of the global movement for persons with disabilities and making this world much more inclusive than what we are today. Let me share an example. Our office in Fiji has recently developed a toolkit as part of a pilot initiative on disability inclusiveness in disaster risk reduction management in Fiji in partnership with the Pacific Disability Forum. Now, this is not an isolated example, although such production of knowledge is critical for the climate vulnerability that we experience in the Pacific. But this is happening across the board, across the regions. And many of our countries in South Asia, countries in Africa are also looking into this knowledge. And in the spirit of cross-regional South-South cooperation, more and more knowledge that are being generated in one country are also transferred to other countries and other regions. And UN Women is working with stakeholders across the region to ensure gender responsiveness and disability inclusiveness of the implementation of the Sendai framework. Now, Based on our work and our conversation with our partners, and partners like many of you who are attending today, including UNITAR, University of Tokyo, KOMEX Forum on Diversity, Disability and Inclusion, Empower Project, Unite, TCI Global, STEP. We are really developing and strengthening our knowledge base, our awareness level, and making sure that these bases are also influencing some of the programmatic action, the policy advocacy action that we are seeing on the ground. And based on this work, we come up with a few recommendations. Number one, mainstream gender and disability inclusion across DRR and response policies and practices. Number two, develop questions and methodologies which enable reliable identification of people with disabilities and their needs immediately following a disaster. Number three, identify and address the disability-specific needs of men, women, and children with disabilities prior to and after disasters. Number four, work in partnership with disabled people or organizations or organizational persons with disabilities to prepare and implement disability-inclusive disaster risk reduction and response activities. Number five, acknowledging the specific challenges faced by women with disabilities following disasters and their vulnerabilities. It is important to implement disaster risk reduction strategies which support their safety and inclusion. So the challenge and the solution has to be synced. And number six, ensure child-friendly disaster risk reduction, response, and recovery initiatives are inclusive of children with diverse disabilities and their families, where women play a disproportionate and burden of care. Women have to carry that burden, and we are highlighting this as one of the challenges for all of you so that you understand this and you also adapt in your respective strategies. We must emphasize the inclusive all of society approaches supported by budget and institutionalized collaboration to build resilience with recognition that DRR is a collective responsibility for leaving no one behind. We must therefore invest in and apply inclusive and accessible approaches, tools, and disaggregated data, understand and communicate that disproportionate impacts on people with disabilities, different gender and age, institutionalize a multi-stakeholder inclusive approach, support effective and inclusive protection and safety nets, leverage transparent and sustainable investment for gender responsive, age sensitive and inclusive DRR at all levels. And last but not the least, strengthen gender responsive and inclusive preparedness and invest in accessible early warning system. It is important because many of our systems that we are developing are not accessible, and we are realizing that after paying a heavy price of loss of lives and loss of livelihood of those who need it most in a moment like aftermath of crisis or a disaster. With that note, I would close my intervention here. Thank you very much again for inviting us. And I hope this would not be the last, and we'll continue to collaborate our collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monjurul, for your consistent friendship, partnership, and your leadership at both global and national levels. Now it is my privilege to welcome Mei J. Mei J has a multinational backgrounds including Japan, Iran, Turkey, Russia, Spain, and the UK. She has a globally esteemed recognition as a singer and a performer. Her works include Let It Go, the end song of the Disney movie Frozen in Japan, and the leading role in The Bodyguard, the musical. She is also active in various social activities, including her work with UNHCR. It is my great honor to welcome Mei J for her special performance of the theme song of this event, I Can Carry On.
just well so far alone, overcoming all my sorrows. I can go on. Now I have come so far along, so never worry. I can go on like a star that shines above, even on rainy days. I can climb over the mountains, I can cross the horizon far beyond, I can fly above the windy storms, I can survive. They say whatever they want, they see only what they wanna see. But I know no one can break me down. I refuse to give up hope. I can carry on. I will create my fate, my own. Will find my strength within. I know I can carry on. I can carry on. I can fly if I spread my wings. No need
Thank you very much, Meijay, for such an emotional and extraordinary performance to kick off this important event. Now, I would like to welcome Professor Atsuro Tsutsumi at the Kanazawa University. Professor Tsutsumi is the esteemed global leader in this area of promotion and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities in emergency settings. Based on his experience in the UN and in the fields, Professor Tsutsumi will give us an introduction and overview of global normative frameworks to move this priority forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Takashi, for your kind introduction, as well as your persistent leadership on disability-inclusive development. It's been my privilege to have worked with you since you have served as the Chief on Mental Well-being and Disability at the UN and the World Bank through the process to realize disability-inclusive SDGs and beyond. I'd like to appreciate UNITAR, UN Women, and the University of Tokyo KOMEX, Empower Project, Unite, Porque, and STEP for co-convening this important and timely event. In addition, I'm touched with heartfelt and amazing performance by Meijay. Today, I'd like to give some overview on the global normative frameworks on mental well-being and psychosocial disabilities related to disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, adopted at the UN General Assembly in 2006, transformed the concept of disability in the international arena. The Convention states persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society. Conventions are legally binding among those countries that ratify them, and 185 states parties have ratified the convention at present. As I mentioned, CRPD transformed the concept of disability. The convention adopted the social model in which disability is attributed to the social barriers, including environmental barriers, institutional barriers, and attitudinal barriers, and persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities, as well as persons with intellectual disabilities, are explicitly included in the convention. And the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, also includes disability as priorities in 5 goals, namely in Goal 4 on inclusive quality education, Goal 8 on inclusive employment, Goal 10 on empowerment and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, Goal 11 on accessible public transport and public space, and Goal 17 on disability disaggregated data collection in each country. Additionally, in relation to mental well-being, Goal 3 includes Target 3.4 on promoting mental health and well-being. Global community, including organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities, is now working hard to realize true meanings of the right to health, which is consistent with CRPD in protecting and promoting the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities, community-based, and self-determination. In addition to the SDGs, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, adopted at the World Conference on disaster risk reduction advanced the concept of inclusive disaster risk reduction as its foundation. It describes that empowerment and inclusive, accessible, and non-discriminatory participation in policy and practice by persons with disabilities as a key starting point of disaster risk reduction policy and program development and implementation. Regarding mental well-being, the priority 4 stresses accessibility to psychosocial support and mental health services for all people who want them. Despite these global frameworks, the reality surrounding persons with mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities is still serious. For example, 80% of member states that have ratified the CRPD have legal restrictions on the voting rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And nearly half countries permit dismissal from work due to psychosocial disability. As for the right to marry, about 40% of countries deny it in their laws. And 90% of persons with severe mental health conditions are unemployed. Many children with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities are excluded from education. As to the right to access health services, 80% of persons with mental health conditions cannot receive appropriate health services if they want. And at the same time, many suffer from unnecessary over-medicalizations or institutionalization. Risks of being a victim of sexual violence, physical assaults are also higher, often due to stigma and discrimination. As a result, those with severe mental health conditions die 20 years earlier compared to those without. Behind these, there are ongoing challenges such as invisibility of mental health condition and psychosocial disabilities, existence of misconception, stigma, and discrimination, and attitude, lack of awareness, political commitment and health policies, budget allocation, and coordination with other key areas, and lack of meaningful participation and inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities in all the processes, including the decision-making process. In disaster and humanitarian settings, these get more serious. Now is the time to change these. In order to do so, we need to make sure all the disability, disaster risk reduction, and humanitarian policies and programs will ensure meaningful participation, which is inclusion of persons with mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities in all the processes related to disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action policy and practice. Removing barriers, especially institutional and attitudinal barriers, starting from stopping harmful practices. Empowerment of persons with mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities so that all of us can demonstrate our full potential in this society. And developing national systems to gather disaggregated data for monitoring inclusive disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action, and to make the invisible visible with scientific data. In addition, the international community should consider making mental and emotional well-being as a new key indicator for the development and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Atsuro. Now, I would like to welcome Ms. Bhargavi Davar, Executive Director, Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI. TCI is a global organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and Ms. Davar will share key points and foundation on including persons with psychosocial disabilities, as well as a perspective of mental well-being in disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action.
Good day to everyone. My name is Bhargavi Davar. I am Executive Director at Transforming Communities for Inclusion, a global organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. We are membership-based. We enlist OPDs of persons with psychosocial disabilities into our membership. We have presence in about 42 countries. In the last years, we have been a number of events of disasters and humanitarian crisis in our regions, Asia Pacific region particularly. We've seen tsunamis, earthquakes, conflict, political conflict, civic conflict, all of that. We are very concerned that building back better for persons with psychosocial disabilities has meant building more institutions or finding places of aggregation of persons with psychosocial disabilities. In the political conflicts in Sri Lanka, in the Philippines, in many parts of our regions, we find this to be a universal phenomenon. Many people were institutionalized. These institutions vary in size and shape, but people lose their right to liberty and also right to life, among many other rights in these institutions. So our key message today to all people who are audience to COSP and to this event is that we are really appealing to all policymakers to make the right to live in the community and be included in all programs, in all policies, in all social spaces available to become a real right for us. The Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities gives a very beautiful new human right, which is Article 19, which is the right to live in the community independently and be included. We wish, we dream for this right to become real for us. I have had the good fortune to be associated with a number of community projects. And the first barrier to cross in bringing people into this right to live in the community is the attitudinal barrier. Policymakers, program managers think that persons with psychosocial disabilities are not capable of living in the community. There are many legal barriers to our inclusion. So our first recommendation would be study the legal chapters in your national laws and see what needs to be repealed. In many parts of Asia, we fortunately do not have the mental health law. So institutionalizing people in some countries is more difficult than in some other high-income Asian countries. So where people are living inside institutions, to resettle them into the communities costs money. Budgets must be made available. There must be the enabling legal frameworks. There should be no barrier for enjoying the right to live in the community, no legal barriers. And after the legal barriers, then there should be plans and budgets in the national planning process for ensuring the right to live in the community. At the programs level, we have been involved in quite a number of programs in India, in Nepal, and some other places, where there are some key recommendations that will help to prevent the institutionalization of persons, especially during the recent pandemic, during disasters, all of that. Working on housing is the most important element for resettlement in communities post a disaster. Choice in housing in the place of residence, having a number of housing options available. These housing options should not be, again, like an institution, like many group homes, many transit homes, and so on. They look like institutions and they function like institutions. So community life should be amply possible for people who are choosing a particular type of housing. They should be able to choose their housing. They should be able to live on equal basis with others, enjoy time with neighbors, enjoy time with friends, be free to go out into the market, be free to buy what they want, their dresses, clothing, all of that. And there should be no medical surveillance in such community spaces. Addressing the basic needs. There are many people who, after a disaster, will not have resources for basic needs, especially in low and middle income countries. They are often, having to fend for themselves without any social protection from governments. Governments find it easier to just put them inside segregated settings. Again, to avoid this, there must be a package of social protection, which could be in cash or it could be in kind. There are some countries, we in India, in Pune, we started a cash transfer policy for people who were moving from institutions to community life during the pandemic time. And such social protection measures should be made available. The third is, of course, work and employment. There must be some ready-made or readily available choices available for people who are in the post-disaster to be mainstreamed into communities. Work and employment is most critical. So between social protection, work and employment, skill development programs, a lot of life needs are covered. There will be some people with high support needs who may not be able to access these resources. And for them, there should definitely be some cover for community support systems so that they are cared for in the community. Many people post-disaster do not have the support of their families. The families have abandoned them or they have neglected to rescue them from their institutions. So they are found in these places, without any kind of support. So to address this need of people who have been left behind in a very big way, without any kind of resources, I think intensive community support needs to be provided along with addressing a variety of support needs, services, healthcare, perhaps food and nutrition, clothing, housing. So there would be a wide range of needs for people who are absolutely resourceless. And it happens a lot to persons with psychosocial disabilities, particularly in low and middle income settings. They would be wandering or homeless or abandoned in places. Policy must take note of them and cover for them. Prevention of suicide is again a very big, when we talk about psychosocial health and well-being, a lot of us in our peer communities depend on well-being services or well-being practices, self-care practices, being able to access friends and peers who are engaged. In my country, a lot of it is about mindfulness practices, yoga practices, decent food, balanced diet, exercise, running, walking, going to the gym, other nature, connecting with nature, doing gardening. These have very positive psychosocial impact on persons, all persons, but also persons with psychosocial disabilities. Well-being services available to people in general should not be denied to persons with psychosocial disabilities. In fact, they will benefit a lot if allowed to access those very same resources that helps the general population to stay fit and well. My key message is there should be ample disability specific and general services available in communities. the law must not pose a barrier for people to leave places of segregation and seclusion and come to live in housing, in common areas, access common markets, use the metro, use the railways on equal basis with others. And so prevention of institutionalization, being of support to people who are considering ending their lives, this is a very big issue, particularly for young people with psychosocial disabilities. When people can access social capital, then they feel good. So it is hard to imagine that somebody will be sitting in a solitary confinement room in a mental hospital and feel good, where there is absolutely no sensory contact with any other human being, animal, or nature around them. So it is impossible. So, and this is common sense, it is not a very big policy issue. So let us all strive to work towards inclusive communities, whether high income or low income, and whatever the cultures and practices that may exist per country. Thank you so much for this opportunity, University of Tokyo and friends in the Japan National Group of persons, mentally disabled persons. We look forward to more and more of such exchanges. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhargavi. Our next speaker is Ms. Supaanong Panyasirimongkol, Nunu, the Networking and Collaboration Officer of the Asia Pacific Development Center on Disability, APCD, based in Thailand. APCD is a regional center for persons with disabilities and development. APCD was established as a collaboration of the government of Thai and JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, and now working as a regional hub for disability inclusive development in Asia and the Pacific.
Hello everyone, my name is Supaanong Panyasirimongkol, or you can call me Nunu. I am represent as self-advocate with autism and also my peers with invisible disability. I'm also working as networking and collaboration officer at Asia Pacific Development Center on Disability, or APCD for short. In the wheel of a lesson learned, persons with disabilities always have a joke in the movement that says, we are the first to be forgotten and the last to remember. This may serve as a valuable lesson learned for persons with autism who work in the field of disaster risk reduction and humanitarian relief, while those with visible disabilities are often given more attention to those with invisible disabilities because of lack of awareness, knowledge, and capacity building among the frontliners, practitioners, and educationalists. In my experience on the good practice, during the 6-month period of January 2021 to July 2021, the JICA APCD Partnership Project and the Community Empowerment Program was implemented. The individuals with invisible disabilities and other special needs may face difficulties such as weight gain, mood swing, and a lack of physical activities at home during a lockdown, which is why the online need assessment survey and interview and 3 online workshops were built to enable them to cope with COVID-19. A handbook was developed from the workshop results and key recommendations previously indicated. Thus, the Guidebook on Physical Activities at Home for Children with Disabilities has been translated into 10 ASEAN languages, including English and Japanese. All 10 slides were modified by the country facilitator in each country. Each chapter in this guidebook includes a QR code that links to the video at home. It will be very easy to use. There will be a set of guidelines that can be downloaded here. In addition to ongoing implementation in this year, the first ever third country training program on strengthening disability inclusive disaster risk reduction in the ASEAN region is still in place. According to the online discussion project evaluation and Google Form submission. Parents and children with disabilities enjoy and consider the project was very interesting and useful, especially in the situation of COVID-19 pandemic. The SCAP APCD partnership project on protecting and empowering persons with disabilities in the context of COVID-19 pandemic is the second good practices which APCD had just implemented. APCD implement the protecting and empowering person with disability in context of COVID-19 pandemic. The project has empowered self-advocate with intellectual disability, their families and supporters to achieve food security, health promotion, and independent living to COVID-19 pandemic and after COVID-19 pandemic. APCD endorsed the triangle collaboration strategy, which seeks to advance the right of individuals with intellectual disability through strong collaboration between self-advocates, their families, and supporters. Lastly, for my key recommendations, first recommendation that I would like to talk about is a calm room in the emergency shelter. This not have to be a full function calm room with light and sound, but just a quiet space and room to be separate from crowded and noisy area. And this calm room is not just for them. This can be used also with the breastfeeding station, or can be a mental counselor station also. And this will also benefit for everyone in the shelter. Secondly, to involve person with autism and person with disabilities in all pre, while, and post process will be very, very essential elements. For example, make sure that person with autism and person with disabilities are involved in the discussion of community disaster management plan. Why, when the disaster happened, do prioritize what have been written in the plan, need to be punctual, yet flexible according to the actual situation. And after this disaster happened, continuous knowledge sharing and disaster practice is the key. Together with capacity building of practitioners, frontliners, and awareness raising among public and private sectors is very important. If you want to connect me, kindly add my Facebook by search my username display here. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณมากค่ะ Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Nunu. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Yuhei Yamada, Executive Director of Porque, which is an organization of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities based in Japan. He is also a board member of Japan National Group of Mentally Disabled People. He is a member of the committee to develop the parallel report for the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which will be reviewed this August. He will speak in Japanese, and Ms. Satoko Hagino, representative of UNITE, will provide interpretation in English.
一般社団法人精神障害当事社会ポルケの山田由平と申します。
I'm Yuhei Yamada, the Executive Director of Porque.
ユニタール UN Women 東京大学をはじめ多くの関係者のご助力によりセッション開催のご尽力に感謝申し上げます。
I would like to thank all those who made every effort to make this important session happen, including UNITAR, UN Women, and University of Tokyo.
新型コロナウイルスの猛威が世界を覆って3年が経過をしました。感染症の恐怖とともに人々に孤立をもたらしている中、このような機会を通じて皆さんとつながりの機会をいただけることを大変嬉しく思います。
It has been 3 years since the COVID-19 pandemic has started, and many of us experienced isolation along with the fear. I appreciate that I am given this opportunity to connect with you in such a situation.
さて、災害のことは考えただけでも不安な気持ちになることがあります。
I appreciate that I am given this opportunity to connect with you in such a situation. さて、災害のことは考えただけでも不安な気持ちになることがあります。
さて、災害のことは考えただけでも不安な気持ちになることがあります。 それでもできること、やれることに取り組む必要があると私は考えています。
To talk about disasters, we perhaps feel anxious just by thinking about that. We need, however, to do whatever we can to prepare for it.
日本列島は地震や水害といった災害のリスクにさらされやすいエリアです。日本のことわざに備えあれば憂いなしというものがあります。しっかりと準備をすれば心配することはないという意味ですが、あらゆる方面でも災害についても対策と備えをする必要があります。
Japan is located in an area where there is a high risk of disasters such as earthquakes and floods. There is one Japanese saying, goes as preparation makes things all right. It means nothing to worry if you thoroughly prepare in advance against potential threats. We need to prepare for disasters in various sectors.
精神障害のある人の包摂もその一つです。精神障害のある人の防災、人道への包摂において、スティグマの解消は大きな課題です。特に精神障害は目に見えない障害と言われます。そのため、精神障害者はまるでいないものとして扱われることが多いです。また、精神障害への偏見は根深く、地域社会で障害者であることを秘密にしている人も多くいます。
The inclusion of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities is one of those. In particular, addressing the stigma is the key in including persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in disaster risk reduction or DRR. Often, mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities are deemed as invisible. As a result, persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities are often regarded as non-existent or left behind. In addition, due to pervasive prejudice, many persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities do not disclose that they have disabilities.
しかし日本では身体障害者や知的障害者よりも多い420万人の人々が精神障害とともに生活をしています。障害者権利条約批准後、必要な服薬をしたり、福祉制度を活用することで地域生活を送る人々はますます増えています。防災を含む障害者に関連する政策において、精神障害者についてもしっかりと包摂する必要があります。その上で日常の課題に目を向けることが重要です。
However, in reality, there are 4.2 million people live with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in Japan. This is much more than the number of those with physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities. After the ratification of the convention, there are an increasing number of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities living in communities with managing medications and utilizing welfare systems. Therefore, it is necessary to include persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in all the policies, including those related to DRR. In it, it is important to pay attention to their daily needs.
一方で DRR は予算があまりにも少ないという課題があります。日本では今年から精神障害を含む福祉サービスを利用する障害者に対して個別避難計画を実装する政策が行われるようになりました。これは障害者自身が災害時の生活イメージをもとにして避難先の確認や連絡体制を点検する機会となっています。
However, one of the challenges is that the budget allocation for Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction, or DIDRR, is extremely limited. This year, in Japan, a new policy has been implemented and the municipalities that are recommended to develop individual evacuation plans for those who utilize welfare services in communities, including persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities. This helps persons with disabilities ourselves learn about and check evacuation routes and contact information based on individual lifestyles and living conditions.
これは災害リスクがある障害者自身のエンパワーメントとしても重要な意味を持ちます。また個別避難計画を地域で体系化することで質と量の両面から精神障害者全体の防災の課題を明らかにする機能としても重要となります。今後これを有効に実施していくためには十分な予算措置が必要で、これは現在の課題です。
This also serves as empowerment of persons with disabilities so that we can manage disaster risk ourselves. In addition, systematizing the individual evacuation plan is the communities. It makes easier to clarify the needs and gaps among persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in terms of both quantity and quality. However, since the budget is not good enough, there are certain gaps in its implementation and its effectiveness.
また2011年に発生した東日本大震災は東北地方を中心に広範囲に甚大な被害をもたらしました。この災害によって障害者の死亡者数は全体のおよそ2倍から4倍に達したということが障害者団体の協力による統計調査によって明らかになりました。例えば福島県内の精神科病院では避難の在り方に問題があり、多くの精神障害のある人が亡くなってしまうということがありました。
The Great East Japan earthquake in 2011 caused huge damage in the northeastern part of Japan. According to the survey by organizations of persons with disabilities, the mortality of persons with disabilities was 2 to 4 times higher compared to persons without disabilities. There was a problem on how to evacuate, for example, in a mental health hospital in Fukushima, which resulted in a great number of deaths of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities.
仙台防災枠組みで確認されたように、災害に対するレジリエンスを高めるために、脆弱性を改善することが極めて重要となります。しかし法制化には課題が残っています。例えば DRR について特化した公的な検討の場が求められます。
As illustrated in the Sendai framework for DRR, it is necessary to work on vulnerability in order to promote resilience against disasters. There are still left problems with the legislation, however. We need, for instance, an official mechanism where DIDRR is regularly discussed.
ところで2019年の台風被害の際に障害者を対象とした避難所が大田区で初めて開設されました。私たち精神障害者の団体はアンケート調査を行い、当事者視点で当時の課題を提出しました。その結果、私たちの提言が防災計画に一部反映されました。これは日頃からの行政機関と障害者団体の連携が生かされた結果だと考えています。
By the way, in Ota in Tokyo, the municipal government established its first ever welfare evacuation site when a typhoon disaster happened in 2019. We surveyed persons with mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities after that and shared our experiences with the municipal government. After that, our views are reflected in the municipal DRR plan. It was successfully achieved because we had day-to-day communication between the municipal government and organizations of persons with disabilities before the event.
またこれをもとにして障害者団体として現在ダイアリープロジェクトというものが発足しました。国立精神・神経医療研究センターと共同で推進しています。過去に起きた大規模な災害時の精神障害のある人の経験を通じて必要な対策や実践を提案しようというものになります。
Based on this experience, we are working on a project for disability inclusive action and disaster risk reduction survey, Diary Project, as an organization of persons with disabilities in cooperation with the National Center of Neurology and Psychiatry. In this project, we aim to suggest measures and practices necessary. Through the experiences of persons with mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities who underwent massive disasters in the past.
私たちが主体となってコミュニティに働きかけ、より良い社会づくりに貢献をしていきたいと思います。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
We would like to take the initiative to further engage with communities in order to contribute toward making a better society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuhei and Satoko. Now it is my great pleasure to welcome Ms. Sakurako Kishino, former representative of UNITE, and Mr. Shun Kageyama from the Empower project. Shun and Sakurako have been working with various global and local stakeholders, including UN agencies, governments, civil society organizations, and business sector. They have been co-organizing events at the Conference of States Parties of the Convention and the International Day of Persons with Disabilities at the UN headquarters, and bringing innovative and transformative perspectives to global discourse.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. First of all, I would like to thank UNITAR, UN Women, and all the co-organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And thank you very much for all the distinguished panelists and participants for getting together. It is a great honor for me to share our activities and my thoughts in this important global session today. My name is Sakurako Kishino. I am a former representative of UNITE, a student organization at the University of Tokyo. We engage in various activities aiming at a world where no one is left behind through arts and culture, in collaboration with UN agencies and other partners. Let me start by talking about my personal experiences. I like to write novels, and I find it easier for me to express my joy and sadness through writing stories, rather than explaining my emotions directly. I have been engaging with art exchange programs with colleagues with psychosocial disabilities and persons with cerebral palsy. When reading their novels or poems, I get absorbed in their works and I feel I can communicate with them directly, which means there is no room and no need at all for judgment based on attribution, categories, or any other differences. This is partly because all those differences are the source of wonders and, in a way, a presupposition of all the characters and stories. I believe artistic expressions in general are extremely powerful in many ways, including in removing barriers, understanding each other, and changing societies. And for that, there must be a safe space where we can express ourselves or communicate without encountering barriers and aggression. In line with such experience, together with colleagues in my university, we launched the Voice of Youth Japan in partnership with UNICEF, an online platform where youth can share their thoughts and opinions and can communicate with each other safely. We put special focus on marginalized youth, including those living in rural areas, youth with disabilities, LGBTI youth, and others. In other words, listening to unheard voices from silent majority as well as silent minority. Since its inception, many youth have shared their opinions, stories, pictures, and music on the platform. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the platform served as an important resource to address anxiety and fear and empower each other among many youth. This was possible because we have protected the safety and security of this platform. In this era of severe disasters, as well as increasing number of long conflicts, we encounter a lot of hate messages and aggression in the cyberspace, as well as in the real community. I feel this represents unsafe environment where safety and security are not protected. UNICEF and many other organizations are promoting child-friendly spaces in and after emergency settings worldwide. The purpose of the child-friendly space is consistent with our principle. Expressing what they want to express through artistic expressions, in addition to verbal communication, engaging with others, and playing in safe and secure spaces. I think we can learn from those practices through COVID and other crises. We need safety and security as the foundation for everything. For that, we need to make sure all the barriers are removed in a true sense. For that, not only physical barriers, but also institutional barriers and attitudinal barriers for psychosocial disabilities have to be addressed at all levels, including individual, community, national, and international levels. And for that, I believe arts and culture have an important role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Izutsu. First of all, I'd like to thank our co-organizers, including UNITAR and UN Women, and the partners for making this session possible. It is a great pleasure to represent young people who are working on various agendas related to leaving no one behind. Let me start by asking a question. What do you do when you feel stressed out? You may watch movies, listen to music, or play sports. In my case, I usually visit natural spaces to relieve my stress. Engaging with nature, such as looking at beautiful sceneries, listening to birds' voices, and smelling the soil, always make me relax. Now, these nature's social and psychological benefits attract big attention in the world. In particular, ecologists call them relational values, which are distinctive from traditional values by their ability to capture subjective and unsubstitutable values of nature. Academic research has shown that people with strong connection with nature have better mental well-being and smoother recovery from distress. Although nature has a vast potential to improve our mental well-being, it also causes negative impacts. One of the most profound impacts is disasters, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, storms, droughts, volcanic eruptions, and floods. Our identity and well-being are closely connected to our surrounding landscapes. Thus, when crisis changes our residential environments dramatically, we feel a sense of loss. This feeling can lead to severe impacts on our mental well-being. To cope with such crises, we should not intend to dominate nature. Since mental and psychosocial well-being affects us in different ways, depending on each one of our personality, environment, and contexts, we have to pay attention to unique needs of each individual. The Empower project, which I have been promoting worldwide with my fellow youth, is innovative in its focus on the needs of individuals, instead of categorizing people based on their attributions. Anyone needs support when not feeling well or after a crisis. Likewise, anyone can be empowered and become a supporter. The Empower project aims at making everyone be a supporter using this magenta star logo, through which anyone can show his or her willingness to support others. We call this process coming out by supporters. I believe this can address some of key social barriers, including attitudinal barriers. Nature can provide both benefits and challenges. However, if we focus on our needs and support each other in our communities, we can have a good relationship with nature, fellow human beings, and the society as a whole. Also, I think that promoting a new paradigm to include emotional well-being as a key global monitoring indicator, in addition to traditional ones, is a critical step in promoting our mental well-being, as well as promoting and protecting the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sakurako and Shun. Our next speaker is our co-organizer, Ms. Avia Akim from STEP, Pakistan. Ms. Avia is the founding leader of the Global Forum on the Leadership of Women with Disabilities that are hosted by the UN, UN Women, STEP, and the University of Tokyo. We just organized another side event on 13th of June together with women leaders with disabilities worldwide.
My name is Adya Akram and I'm representing the Global Forum on the Leadership of Women and Girls with Disability. It's such an honor for me to be part of this panel during the conference of the state parties. We know 10 to 15% of the total population are persons with disability and 50% of them are women and girls with disability. And when we talk about the overall inclusion, it is critically important to see how women and girls with disabilities are completely left behind during the disaster response, the humanitarian response. We are witnessing millions of persons with disabilities who are displaced, became disabled during the earthquake or any conflicted situation. There is no services that are available. They are the ones who are facing gender-based violence. They are the ones who are excluded or left behind, and their parents took the expensive things and left them. It's really important how we are seeing the inclusion of persons with disabilities and their leadership at all levels. In the policy making, in the legislation, at the same time, they are working as an inclusive partner with the state, with the international organization and the humanitarian response organization. We are also seeing one of the key important points about the psychosocial support for women and girls with disability, because they got a lot of trauma during the COVID response. We have seen that. So it's really important we are engaging women with disabilities themselves to conduct the trainings for women with disability and other stakeholders. And we really want to see a dignified life for them, and that's only possible if we have the representation and the true voices of persons with disability. Disability rights are human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abia. Now we are approaching the end of the event, and it is my privilege to welcome Ms. Akiko Ito for her closing remarks. Akiko has served as Chief of the United Nations Secretariat for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as co-chair of the UN Interagency Support Group on the Convention for a long time, and most of the breakthroughs in this area in the United Nations were brought about thanks to Akiko's wonderful leadership and coordination. It is my honor to have you today.
Dear colleagues, distinguished panelists, and esteemed friends, thank you so much for organizing this very timely event on invisible disabilities with special attention to the rights of persons with mental health conditions as well as psychosocial disabilities in disability inclusive disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. We have learned today a lot about good practices and recommendations shared by those leaders of organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities from many countries, as well as youth leaders who gave us very insightful and very valuable opinions as to how we can go forward. And I hope this event, building on what they have contributed to today, I hope that we will be able to see more contributions to this platform. And we hope that today's event will bring momentum for us to move forward, to take practical action to tackle harmful practices and other obstacles for disability inclusive disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. And in addition, I would like to thank the organizers and their partners to bring this important issue of mental well-being of all of us to the discussion of disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. I would like to thank Ms. May J for her extremely beautiful and touching performance. And I really appreciated this inspirational and empowering performance that she has brought to us today through her profound message in this art. Thank you so much. Last but not least, I would like to thank Professor Takashi Izutsu and Professor Atsuro Tsutsumi for their consistent leadership in this field. Professor Takashi Izutsu and Professor Atsuro Tsutsumi have been global leaders in advancing the rights of persons with disabilities with a focus on mental health and other mental disabilities that we address at the United Nations, and we'd like to thank them so much. Thank you so much. And I also like to express great appreciation to our colleagues from the UN system and our partners for making this wonderful event possible. I hope we can continue our collaboration today and perhaps in future build a stronger platform together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Akiko. Since 2009, the United Nations, together with partners, have advocated for inclusion of perspectives of mental well-being and the rights of persons with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities in global priorities. Together, we have organized expert group meetings, COSP and IDPD events, among others. As a result of persistent and difficult effort by various stakeholders, now we have normative frameworks that integrate mental well-being and disability, increasing good practices and lessons learned, visibility, and growing partnerships among policymakers, practitioners, and organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities. As we promised in the 2030 Agenda, we should endeavor to reach the furthest behind and stop harmful practices first. In addition, now is the time to understand mental well-being as foundation for all the peace and security, sustainable development, and protection of human rights, since human beings are emotional beings. As wisely described in the UNESCO Constitution, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Let's realize the world where peace will be constructed in our minds through addressing all the barriers in our minds. Thank you very much.